I'm Connor Old, and welcome back to another episode of Old's Oscar Countdown. And this week we're going to be talking about 3 different categories, wrapping up the categories that I haven't talked about yet before we get into the big thick of things. We're still, 3 or so weeks away from the Oscar nominations, but in the meantime, we're going to be talking about the Golden Globes predictions, Critics' Choice Awards, the Actors Awards, all the reactions and analysis and predictions for those award shows that will ultimately help us for the Oscars. The BAFTA nominations aren't until after the Oscars, so I'm not going to be focusing on them, probably not until their actual award show happens and we predict the winners. And even though this is kind of the last video of the categories, I will give one final Oscar nominations video where I give my final predictions. We just won't go into too much depth into those individual categories like we do on these episodes. And if you're new to the series, welcome. What I've been doing now in our 10th season of predicting the Oscars very accurately is go week by week, individual category by individual category, and give my predictions as to what I think is going to get nominated, kind of survey the entire landscape to ultimately help you with your predictions. Talk about what the kind of top 5-7 possible contenders are, why I picked the movies I did, and to ultimately help you with your own predictions and to see where we are, with an expert of sorts, 10 seasons now on YouTube predicting the Oscars, doing very well, particularly with the nominations, and feel very good about that. And that's because we do the research, we do the deep dives on even some of these smaller categories, because getting these categories right is just as important in terms of your overall score as some of those more flashy, top-of-the-line predictions like the Best Actor category. So without further ado, let's jump into things. Starting off with the Best Visual Effects category, I think this is going to be an interesting one. My first pick is going to go to Avatar: Fire and Ash. This is an obvious pick. The last 2 Avatar movies not only got nominated, but won in this category. Regardless of the kind of more middling reviews for this most recent one, I would be stunned if this missed, just because regardless of what you think of the film, everyone agrees that the visual effects are top-notch, the motion capture that they employ, the fact that a lot of people watch this in the movie theater, so there's no issues with, it not working as well at home, for example. A lot of people do watch it in the theaters and can see the kind of the grand scale of the visual effects. Late releasing movie, so it's going to be top of mind in terms of its awareness. Absolutely lock this in for a prediction. Then my next pick, I went with F1, which is maybe not a pick that you would think, VFX heavy right away, but it is a classic Oscars pick. This is a film that is more in the lines of a 1917 or an All Quiet on the Western Front or a Top Gun Maverick. That is to say, it's kind of invisible VFX. It's movies with intense realism that are not trying to have these CGI characters, but have unique visual effects, and the visual effects are used to create a sense of realism. That's the kind of visual effects that this branch really appreciates. So it may not be obvious as a pick right away, but trust me, this is a classic example of a visual effects kind of almost best picture kind of a film, realism focused, big blockbuster that they love. Then my third pick, I went with Frankenstein, and in the VFX category, it's always a hit or miss whether or not a Best Picture nominated movie gets nominated for VFX. Most years it does, though, whether it be Wicked or All Quiet or 1917. Sure, we have some years like Poor Things missing out, but for the most part, if you have a Best Picture nominated movie in contention at the shortlist, it gets in here. In part just because they like the movie, but also because there's a sense of maybe realism or traditional aspect. You don't see a lot of superhero movies, for example, getting nominated Best Picture. It's more of these types of dramas with this invisible VFX or these period pieces. And Frankenstein kind of fits into that mold. Yes, it has that great makeup and production design, but there still is a lot of VFX, particularly with the ship sequence and some of the action sequences that are going on there that I think will be appreciated by this branch. And it just being a generally well-liked movie will always help as well. Then my fourth pick, I went with Superman, which is my superhero movie slot of the year. They have been pretty partial to superhero movies in the past. It's not a guaranteed nomination, but we've had 5 superhero movies nominated within this decade. And usually those films are more kind of standalone type movies, an origin story in Shang-Chi or the Batman, kind of original story points. They're not like the 15th movie in the MCU that you have to watch 5 before. They're very kind of standalone, like Superman here, which makes me feel good about it. The only kind of sequel superhero movies that do well are the Guardians of the Galaxy films, directed by James Gunn. Superman, directed also by James Gunn. So we know that they like the VFX in his previous superhero movies. Why wouldn't they like the VFX in this film. We know there's a general appreciation from the Academy. This movie also showed up on the sound shortlist, so I do think it is kind of more of on the prestigious level of blockbusters. And I do think that kind of easy jumping in point, and then some of the creatures that are created within this film and the sequences there, even just the Superman flying aspects, will be appreciated as a kind of superhero pick this year. Then my fifth and final pick, I went with Wicked for Good. This is a movie that I still think is going to get nominated for Best Picture, which will help in this category. Usually we see these visual effects films that are shortlisted that are also Best Picture contenders get in. As I mentioned with Frankenstein, the team is the same team. Pablo Hellman being the kind of lead on the film, who's been nominated 4 times, including for the last Wicked. And the question last year was, will Wicked get nominated because it kind of has somewhat shoddy, somewhat poor VFX, and some may say it's a little bit controversial on that side. But yes, it ultimately did get nominated because the movie was well liked. And I see the same sort of situation here. The movie is maybe not as well liked as the first one, but still is relatively well liked. I see a celebrated visual effects designer been nominated in the past. That always helps in terms of this branch. And then the one downside would be, well, is there any sequel issues? Well, not necessarily. They frequently nominate sequels in this category. They're not, opposed to nominating sequels, particularly if it's a franchise that they like the Guardians of the Galaxy. All 3 of those films were nominated for Best Visual Effects. So with some of the introductions of the continuing animals and flying monkeys and Cowardly Lion, they have appreciated the replication of animals VFX, like the Apes movies, or even something like Better Man last year. They like the kind of animal recreations, and that's what the Wicked has as well. Less fantasy, more on that kind of animal recreation visual effects. So I do think Wicked will fill in that final slot. Then my first possible contender, I went with Sinners, and I felt weird leaving it off, but mostly left it off because I was looking at my overall predictions, and I gave Sinners like a lot of nominations, and I don't think it's going to show up everywhere. I don't think it's going to break the record or tie the record for most amount of nominations, so it has to miss in some of these categories. I didn't include it here because even though it's a Best Picture movie, we have 2 others in Frankenstein and Wicked for Good, and that means that it's more likely or not that one of these Best Picture movies is going to miss in the visual effects category. And I thought that, just instinctively, Sinners doesn't have showy VFX. I think about the movie I've seen multiple times, and I go, where is the obvious VFX? It's a lot of makeup, it's a lot of production design, but where is the kind of VFX aside from some of the set extension moments? I didn't really find it a lot, so it felt like it wasn't necessarily a flashy movie that's going to do really well at the Bake Off, let's say, to showcase some of that VFX. But my second possible contender, The Lost Bus, I actually do think will do quite well at the bake-offs, and that's why I have it as a possible contender. The fire sequences that they had to add, I think, will show off in a very kind of demonstrative way. The question will be whether or not enough people have seen the movie. So even if it does really well at the bake-off, will then enough people go and check out the movie to feel comfortable enough nominating it? Every year we see a movie that does really well at the VFX bake-offs that then doesn't get nominated at the Oscars because it's just not a well-seen movie, and I have some concerns that will happen here for The Lost Bus, but maybe it gets in based off that bake-off performance, because I do think it will have one, just based on the nature of the film and the realism that they like, and the fact that I don't think people realize just the extent of the VFX that was done within this film. This is a VFX-heavy film, but it has that realism style that they like. Okay, now talking about the Best Editing category, my first prediction is One Battle After Another. And I included this because it is the frontrunner to win for Best Picture. And if it's going to win Best Picture, it needs to get nominated for Best Editing. Simple as that. In the 21st century, there have only been two films that have won Best Picture that have not been nominated for Best Editing. It's one of the longest standing Oscar stats, and it continues to be proven true every single year. So this editing category is kind of like the mini Best Picture category, where we see what the real strong films are. And because I think One Battle is a real strong film, I've included it in here. And then even aside from that, itself as a contender, itself as a movie, is really strong as an editing pick. It's an action movie, which they like, past nominees being Dune or Top Gun Maverick, kind of these types of action movies with these, fast-paced sequences. There's a sense of propulsion to the film, which I think will be attributed to the editing. And they also like long movies, whether that be Dune, the first Dune, or Killers of the Flower Moon, or Oppenheimer. They like these kind of 2 to 45 minute, 3-hour type epic odysseys, just because I think there is a lot of editing to be done, and to make a movie still entertaining at the length of One Battle, which is like 240, 245, is a testament to its editing. So I do feel very confident it's going to get in for both it as a film, but then also it as a Best Picture contender. Then my second pick is Sinners, which has similar reasons. Not as long, but still on the longer side of things, over 2 hours. Has great editing in the sense of it's a kind of genre mashups, right? It's got action sequences and gunfire sequences, but then also musical and music-based type sequences, and the flow and the rhythm of that is done very well, and then the horror jump scares and the editing there. So mostly concluded it because I think it's a top 2 or 3 Best Picture contender, but the movie itself has enough of the flashy, notable editing, the musical sequences, the Irish jig, things like that, to make it worthwhile of a nomination. So still think Sinners is confidently in there. My third pick, I went with Marty Supreme, and this is not a top 5 Best Picture contender in my mind, but I still included it here because it has very notable, very flashy editing. This is the big kind of obvious comp that I thought of for this movie was the year Elvis came out. Elvis was a movie that got nominated for Best Picture, but was never in contention to win. But it was always a movie that we knew for sure was going to get in the kind of classic 5, 6, 7 slot. And Marty Supreme, I think, is a very similar film where you have a dynamite lead performance and some period nominations that it's going to get in the production design and maybe costume design. But its notable factor, like Elvis was fast-paced, Marty Supreme, very fast-paced, lots of editing, lots of cuts, lots of intensity, that anxiety-induced filmmaking that Safdie is so good at. We see once again here with Marty Supreme. So I'm confident that's going to get in for Best Picture. I'm not confident that's going to win, but that doesn't matter because it's getting in for Best Picture and it has notable editing. And that's a classic kind of a pick here for this category. Then with my fourth pick, I went with Hamnet. And Hamnet maybe doesn't have on paper really stand out in your face flashy editing. I actually push back on some people that say it has no editing at all, or maybe lump it in with a movie like Green Book. The movie does have, somewhat non-linear experiential editing. It does feel similar to some of Chloe Zhao's other films. She co-edited this film, like she's edited some of her past films, and was nominated for 2020's Nomadland. So there is some uniqueness to her editing, that kind of Terrence Malick-inspired style. But maybe if this wasn't being nominated for Best Picture, it probably wouldn't be in contention here. But the truth of the matter is, it is going to be nominated for Best Picture. And in my mind, it's still a top 2, 3 contender to potentially even win Best Picture. And if that's the case, as we mentioned before, it needs to get nominated here. Because as a matter of fact, I tried to look back over the past 7 or 8 years and just try to figure out, okay, when we have like top 2 contenders, usually there's the Best Picture winner, and then there's usually the kind of option B that some people argue. Were those movies ever not nominated for Best Editing? And the truth of the matter is, no, they were always nominated for Best Editing. Last year was Anora and Conclave. Conclave got in. The year before that, it was Oppenheimer and Holdovers. Holdovers got in. The year before that, it was Everything Everywhere All at Once and Banshees of Inisherin. Banshees got in. Even going back to the Nomadland, Trial of Chicago 7 year, you have those 2 films, both getting in for editing. So, and these are movies that we're talking about, Conclave or The Holdovers or Banshees of Inisherin. They're not movies with like flashy editing. They're traditionally edited kind of movies. Maybe Conclave is a little bit more thrilling. But there's nothing special to them. The fact that they got in for editing was because they were well liked. And so very simply, I have Hamnet in my number 2 slot to potentially win Best Picture. So I think it needs to get nominated here. And if it doesn't, then it's not a serious contender. But because I'm predicting it to be a serious contender, I had to make my predictions make sense. So I made it here in the editing category. And then with my final pick, I went with It Was Just an Accident. And this is not maybe a top 5 Best Picture contender, but it was maybe stronger than some of the other 4, 5, 6 slots in my Best Picture rankings. For me, it was like, okay, I consider this category a category that you have to have been nominated for Best Picture. So then I looked at my nominees and I went, okay, what are the top 5, 7 contenders? And that's what's probably going to get nominated for Best Editing. And I've talked about those 4 other films. And then this final slot, it was like, is it Frankenstein? Is it Sentimental Value? Or was it just an accident? That's kind of how I've ranked my Best Picture rankings. And you will see on Monday my updated Best Picture rankings. But that was kind of my thinking. And then my thinking was, well, which of those movies makes the most sense as an editing pick? And I picked It Was Just an Accident. It felt the most suspenseful, similar to maybe a Trial of Chicago 7 or Conclave, and the tenseness, suspense of the story. The fact that we're constantly introducing new characters. There's a sense of rhythm and propulsion to the film that maybe Sentimental Value and Frankenstein necessarily don't obviously have. There's a little bit more of a traditional kind of a winner or a nominee rather. And I still do consider this, especially with the international branch of the Academy, a serious kind of a maybe dark horser to win for Best Picture, or maybe a screenplay winner, or still a real strong contender, particularly at the Oscars. Then my first possible contender would be, I mentioned it, Frankenstein. Of the three, it was just an accident, the Sentimental Value and Frankenstein. This would be, my number two, fifth slot here, just because I do consider it a top five Best Picture contender. It does have some action sequences. It does have the kind of dueling narratives of Frankenstein and his monster. And there's some impressive aspects to that. My question ultimately is it's in this weird spot where it's 2.5 hours. If it was 3 hours and it was an epic, it would feel maybe bigger in that sense and would get nominated for an editing achievement. But right now, maybe it feels like a 2 hour and 15-minute movie that was stretched to 2.5 hours. So at least in terms of the optics of the awards, it doesn't fit into one category or another really cleanly. And I don't know if it has flashy enough editing, or I don't even know for sure that this is a top five Best Picture contender. Maybe it's not. We'll have to see ultimately. That's what I'm predicting, but I'm not totally confident in that. So I felt like it would just had a little bit more obvious, more traditionally obvious kind of tense editing than maybe something like Frankenstein, which is a little bit more methodical in its storytelling. And then my second possible contender is F1. And I know this is a movie that a lot of people are predicting, but I just can't bet on it because I looked over the past 10 years, right? And that's 50 nominees. And I tallied up all of the films that were nominated in this category that were not nominated for Best Picture. And the total was 4. So about 92% of the time, a movie that gets nominated in the Best Editing category also gets nominated for Best Picture. And the reverse is only 8% of the time do you get a movie not nominated for Best Picture in this category. So frankly, those are terrible odds. I'm not betting on that. I'm not betting this year that something that only happens 8% of the time over the past 10 years will happen. I mean, that's percentage is even less if you don't include 2017, which had the 1 year where it had 2 movies nominated for Best Editing that didn't get in for Best Picture. And it also includes 2015 for The Force Awakens, which didn't have an expanded 10 lineup. And if it did have an expanded 10 lineup, it probably would have gotten in for Best Picture. So there's these factors that sometimes are obvious or not obvious. And I don't think this is an obvious pick. Every year we talk about editing and Best Picture and how they're intimately tied, and yet still people predict movies that aren't going to get nominated for Best Picture in this editing category. It's a fool's errand every single year. And maybe it will happen this year because I don't feel confident my number 5 and F1 is Best Picture adjacent and has this intense, obvious editing kind of a pick. And from a past winner, I get all these things. But I'm just not going to bet on something that happens only 8% of the time in the past 10 years to happen again this year, not when we've seen particularly within the last 5 years. It be pretty much you have to be nominated for Best Picture to be a nominee in this category. That's what this new Academy has been telling us. And, maybe it happens this year. I'm not going to bet on it to happen though. Now talking about the Best International Film category, my first pick is Sentimental Value from Norway. Now, when we talk about this category, we have to talk about, not the American branch of the Academy, but the mostly international branch that is voting on particularly this category. And we can look at things like festivals, fall festivals from European festivals or European groups. That's what I'm going to be mostly looking at. So oftentimes I talk about Sentimental Value. I talk about how it has good American support, has international support. That may not help as much in this category. That being said, this still has strong international support. Joachim's last movie, Worst Person in the World, was nominated for Best International Film in 2021. So they have appreciated his films in this past. This branch has. It's a film that came second place at the Cannes Film Festival, an international film festival, and has been doing very well at the European Film Awards, for example. Got, I think, 5 nominations there, so has been cleaning up quite well within international and European branches, and other award shows. So I feel very confident Sentimental Value will get nominated here. Then I went with It Was Just an Accident, which is actually France's selection this year, despite being a film set in Iran from an Iranian filmmaker. But I expect this movie, to be nominated for Best Picture, maybe Best Director. So it would have to also get in here, just based on how my predictions have been, coming out. And I think that, it won the Palme d'Or, which always helps. Actually went back and saw, what's the track record of Palme d'Or winners? It was pretty consistent there in the late 2010s, but in the 2020s, it's been very hit or miss with Palme d'Or winners getting nominated, most of the time because they haven't been submitted by their individual country. Most of the time when you have, in this case, a Palme d'Or winner being submitted as the film from that country, it usually gets nominated for the Best International Feature. Very confident that it will get in here. My third pick is The Secret Agent, another film that I have nominated for Best Picture, so I'd be surprised if it gets nominated for Best Picture and then not here. An international film that's been really well appreciated by the shortlist in particular, showing up at something like the Best Casting shortlist, I thought was notable. It did well at the European Film Awards and really been celebrated by American critics as well. So I think has kind of the fact that it was so celebrated internationally and then has reached and been appreciated by American critics hasn't always been the case, but the fact that it was indicates to me that there's going to be broad overall support for this film. I thought this movie is maybe not as strong as It Was Just an Accident because it's a little bit more European in its editing style and its length and the way it's telling its story. But of course, that will appeal to this branch, which is largely European, but has some international members, particularly many Brazilians too, which will connect to the political aspects of this film. Then my fourth pick, I went with Sirāt, a movie that did very, very well at the Oscar shortlist, showing up in places that it quote-unquote didn't need to, places like cinematography or casting. Those are surprise nominations. So the fact that there's just general widespread support for the film within the Academy, we know that from the shortlist, gives me very strong belief that this will get nominated as well here. And it's a movie that's been rising, showing up at a lot of technical nominations at the European Film Awards, showing up a critics list more than I expected. So this could potentially even be a Best Picture contender too. I don't have it in right now, but for sure getting nominated here for International Feature. And then my fifth pick, I went with No Other Choice, which is a movie that isn't doing well, but maybe not as well as some of these other international films. Probably should have showed up in a cinematography shortlist, let's say, at the Oscars if it was a real serious contender. That being said, I still think it could get nominated for Best Picture. My question really with this branch is more so, well, will they like Park Chan-wook's movies? He's been making great movies for a long time, but Decision to Leave, The Handmaiden, these movies were not nominated for, international feature. And maybe they just don't like his movies. This group has traditionally been more European-centric. That being said, that may actually help this movie because you have an Asian film and you have a lot of other European films. I have 3 in the South American film. So this movie will just stand out amongst the other nominees based on its setting, based on the actors it decides to use. And what I think is notable that even though Park's other movies haven't been appreciated by this branch or the Oscars broadly, I think it's notable that this movie did very well at the Golden Globes and did a lot better at the Golden Globes than The Handmaiden or even Decision to Leave, getting in for drama, getting in for Lee Byung-yun. And then you have also the fact that No Other Choice, I think, is a potential nominee for Best Adapted Screenplay at the Oscars. It is a movie that's maybe just as well critically celebrated there, but now with a more international group of the Academy, since those films will be a little bit more appreciated by this newer Academy. So I think it'll still get in here. There's a little bit of a hesitation that maybe they just don't like Park Chan-wook and his films, and we do have some strong contenders this year, but it also may include it in here because I do think the Golden Globes, which doesn't have any members of the Academy, yes, but is an international group that has been very accurate at predicting the Oscars, they really went hard for No Other Choice. So that made me feel confident that this is going to be a movie that will resonate with some of these international voters of the Academy. Okay, now finishing off the video with a couple of possible contenders. My first one is Sound of Falling, which made the shortlist at Best Cinematography, and I think is a real contender maybe to get nominated there. Also has done well at the European Film Awards and has done well at more than I expected at some of these other industry groups too. So this is maybe more of an old school pick, a traditional pick, where the old Academy would pick another kind of somber, dark European film. And maybe they do that again this year. It's not a lazy number 6, it's a strong number 6. But I don't know if it's as strong of a contender critically and in the other categories of the Oscars as something like No Other Choice. And then my final possible contender, I went with The Voice of Hind Rajab from Tunisia. This is a very political film, and I don't know if they're going to want to make a kind of big political statement when they already have such other strong films. Maybe in another year, a weaker year, they would have gone for it. Also a critic's pick, but is politically charged. I think ultimately that this is maybe a very heartbreaking movie, but maybe a movie that's hard to vote for because it doesn't make you feel good or make you feel energized about cinema. It's like very powerful, it's very moving, it's very political, but maybe it won't align with every person's political point of view, and that will ultimately limit some of its appeal and the possibility of getting nominated. But that's about it. I hope you enjoyed the video. Make sure you comment below. Let me know your thoughts on the predictions that I've made, and if you want to share your own predictions, I'd love to hear that in the comments down below. But that's about it. Until next time, stay tuned.